is it possible that where Nigeria is today was not only predictable, but it was predicted? These are things I want us to look at. Number one, I want us to see a comment made in 1968 by Obafemi Awolowo, a man who was a thinker. In 1968, he said, "It is incontestable that the British not only made Nigeria, but also handed it to us whole on their surrender of power. But the Nigeria which they handed over to us had in it forces of its own disintegration." This is a very interesting comment coming from Obafemi Awolowo. He says the Nigeria that the British handed over to us was a programmed Nigeria that had within it the forces of its own disintegration. Then he said it's up to contemporary Nigerian leaders to, listen to this, neutralize these forces, to preserve the Nigerian inheritance and make all our people free, forward-looking and prosperous. A comment in 1968, three things: neutralize the forces, preserve the Nigerian inheritance, and then make all our people free, forward-looking and prosperous. 1968. Now you need to ask yourself a question. Since 1968, did anybody neutralize? Did anybody preserve? And did anybody work to make all our people free, forward-looking and prosperous? I'm not saying all the three together at the same time. Has anybody done that? It's a question I'd like you to talk to me. Now, so where we are at today, was it predictable? Let's listen to Nigeria's first Prime Minister. Try and calm down. Listen carefully to his words.
1 week ago, as the clocks were striking midnight and Nigeria was on the threshold of independence, there was a brief ceremony at which the leaders of three different faiths each said a brief prayer.
Three leaders of faith.
We then realized, all of us, that however much we might imagine ourselves to be responsible for the happy accession to independence, we realize that above all, there is a divine providence. And I do honestly believe that one primary essential to international friendship and cooperation is for each man to be true to his religious beliefs and to reaffirm the basic principles of his particular creed. It may be that then, when we hear the world crying out for peace, we may receive the inspiration to deal with these impracticable problems and be able really to devote all our resources to the advancement of mankind by applying those eternal truths which will inevitably persist long after we ourselves are utterly forgotten. Thank you, Mr. President.
Now, that was a speech he delivered at the United Nations General Assembly in New York in 1960, just 1 week after independence. That takes me to like the 8th of October in 1960. Now, this man was a consummate diplomat, because if you listen carefully to his speech, you'll find out that he made a statement that when the world begins to call out for peace. Now, this diplomat, without mentioning the troubles ahead, had looked at the configuration, and if you look at the structure of his speech, he was nobody's fool. But it was obvious that they had adversaries and they had controls that had come from the colonial inheritance that they could do nothing about. But they were advising the people of the future to take note of these things and work it out. In many ways, not only did he talk about intractable problems, not only did he talk about conflicts that would arise when he inferred that there would be a need for peace later on, he also went forward to talk about eternal truths as a clue to how we will solve it. Now, you ask me what he has said and what Obafemi Awolowo finally concluded in 1968. Tell me where there's any difference. Now, if you think that Tafawa Balewa and Awolowo are men who are not thinking, who are just making noise, maybe Nnamdi Azikiwe, who said, "It is better for us, and many admirers abroad, that we should disintegrate in peace and not in pieces." Should the politicians fail to heed the warning, then I will venture the prediction that the experience of the Democratic Republic of Congo will be child's play if it ever comes to our turn to play such a tragic role that was in 1964. Predictable and predicted. There is some of tomorrow inside today. Only beasts, animals, and fools ignore this eternal truth. Now, let's find out. All along, Obafemi Awolowo in 1947 made a comment. Now, I want you to watch the progression, see the comments in 1968, what Tafawa Balewa said in 1960, but I just want to go back again into yesterday to show you how we were being molded, how we were being influenced. Nothing wrong with that, but there comes a time when we need to get wise ourselves. I always said Nigeria is not a nation, it's a mere geographical expression. The word Nigeria is merely a distinctive appellation to distinguish those who live within the boundaries or the borders of Nigeria from those who do not. This was a comment he made as a younger man in 1947. Now, in 1958, he said something. He said, at the conclusion of the Constitutional Conference in London in 1958, I had an overpowering feeling of foreboding. That is, he had a dread. He could see there was something coming up ahead. He said there was something untoward, that's a nice way of saying something terrible, was going to happen to Nigeria. That it would happen, I felt sure. But when it would happen, I had no inkling. At first, I felt as if there was nothing I could do about it. But later on, I thought I might do something about it. 1958, Obafemi Awolowo coming out of the Constitutional Conference, looking back to some of the things, and if you study the notes, you'll find that there was a gentle reprimand that Ladi Thompson gave to Obafemi Awolowo for making a concession that Ladi Thompson had been warning about, for years. On the 8th of October in 1980, Obafemi Awolowo made another comment. He said, indeed, unless the federal government actively promotes the introduction of free education at all levels throughout this country, the gap that stood at 50 years in 1906 between North and South and widened to more than 75 years this year, that was in 1980, would widen to more than 100 years, 10 years from now. That would be the 1990s, a gap of 100 years. He said, if we take serious steps to end that now, we will certainly succeed in reducing the gap considerably in 25 years' time. So he was saying that in 1980, he was saying that by 2005, there should have been a reduction to 25 years between education between northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria. But here's his conclusion. He said the consequences of inaction in this matter are too gruesome for mention on this neutral and quasi-academic forum. Now, if you look quickly, the gruesome results that he said will come for simply ignoring only one factor, education alone. Are we today not in a place where the education has become a factor, or you don't understand the sentiment of the Boko Haram, which is away with education? Not only was it that the gap did not close, it widened, and the voice of crass ignorance has now been emboldened to the point that it is telling you that education is a bad thing. On the 11th of August in 1966, Obafemi Awolowo said this, and tell me what has changed. He said, the welfare and the happiness of the peoples of Nigeria are indivisible. So are their misfortunes and adversities. The welfare and the fortunes and the happiness of all Nigerians are indivisible. So are their misfortunes and adversities. There are two things we must seek to do immediately. 1966. Firstly, we must seek to arrest the process of Nigeria's disintegration and reunite the country. 1966. Now, what did he say? He said the welfare and the happiness of the peoples of Nigeria are indivisible. So are their misfortunes and adversity. So when you say, oh, they attacked somewhere in the east, it doesn't concern the north, you're deceiving yourself. You're either right or the sage who was thinking wrong is wrong. Now, when you say, oh, there's a problem in northern Nigeria, it doesn't concern southern Nigeria, you may think you're right, but there will be a harvest for that thought or your architecture of thought that will come tomorrow, most likely in the time of your children and their children. Although you taste some of it before you go. On the 6th of July, let's go back again, in 1963. And listen to this comment. The ranks of people with empty or half-empty stomachs are increasing daily. 6th of July 1963. He said half-empty stomachs are increasing daily by the hundreds. Many a youth sees the future as a long vista of bleak and hapless journey. They look with expectant yearning to the powers that be, but they receive no favorable response. He says, why is there no response and no favorable response? And this was in 1966. Look at what was happening then. He said, because the existing powers in the land are much more preoccupied with devising ways and means for the destruction of their political opponents than with catering to the best interests of the millions who are hungry but are not fed, who have not but are not supplied. The youth are no longer, the youth are no longer looking to the powers that be anymore in this country. Young girls are making their trips to European nations to go and become prostitutes. You should just go online, go and check some of these things. Some of them don't even have houses. They live in thickets, in grooves, in bushes. Young men, young ladies are trekking across deserts, drinking their own urine. Many of them get killed. Many of them are savage. Many are taken in slavery. As we speak right now, not only Nigerians, but Ghanaians, you name it. West Africans especially. Our youths are being sold as slaves in Arab slaves markets in Africa here. You lost $300 can buy you somebody. The value of human worth has gone to a low that was worse than 1966, 1963. 25th of April 1970. Out of the 60 million inhabitants of Nigeria, 1970, almost 200 million right now, but there was 60 million then, over 90% in 1970 lived in abject poverty and squalor, subsisting on 4 shillings a week per capita, having most insanitary shelters for houses, and wretchedly clad. About 80% are illiterate. Practically all of them suffer from one kind of preventable disease or another, and only a very small percentage indeed can be said to be free from the bondage of superstition, fear, and greed. One of the phenomena in the present day Nigeria, remember this was 1970, is a situation in which stark ignorance and extremity of poverty live side by side with high sophistication and dazzling affluence. Now, you tell me, if indeed all these things are true, is there not a lesson to learn about today and tomorrow? Now, on the 18th of December in 1961, Buffalo said, bribery and corruption, especially in high places, are alarmingly on the increase. A high percentage of the monies which are voted for expenditure on public projects find their way to the pockets of certain individuals. There's unemployment everywhere. The state of living in the country as a whole is very low. In most parts of the country, the peasants and the working class wallow in abject poverty and misery. You know, in 1970, he was talking about people being wretchedly clad. Well, thank God, second-hand clothing are coming from all over the world. And Nigerians today are looking good in what we call second new attire. So when you look at people all spruced up, looking good, don't be deceived. These are the rejects and, things that are coming. Sometimes charitable organizations send them into the country, they find their way into the market. So you can see like lovely Gucci shoes on somebody, don't mean that he bought them brand new. And then, what are we talking about here? If in 1961 it was talking about unemployment, what are we talking about now? If you said the working class and the peasantry lived in abject poverty and misery, what really is obtaining now? Now, there are some lessons we need to learn if we want to bring out the tomorrow that is in today now. First of all, let us rise above politics and let no man deceive himself. Whatever we sow, we will reap.